A room without books is like a body without a soul. Have you even held a book in hand and thought, how did books come about? Well, here to share us all about it, we've got a celebrity historian himself, Raffi. It is a pleasure to have you here today.
Here I am, and you know, I was in the bathroom, and Kevin, one of the staff members here, of course, is always giving me great wisdom just before I come on the show. One of the things he said is, the beauty of life is that even when you don't know, you know. And I feel like that captures the books in a way. Like, even when you don't know, you know that with all that the books capture over thousands of years, that there is great education and knowledge out there to be enlightened, like you said, in the room.
Okay, well, really, it is National Book Month. And Raffi, I'm just so curious. You have a really interesting background.
I do.
Kind of tell us where it's led you.
Sure. I have worked in National Park Service doing tours at historic sites, such as a Gettysburg Battlefield, Martin Luther King home. I also worked in Los Alamos, which is run by a nonprofit, but that's where the atomic bomb was created. That's how I came up with one of the books that I have written right here. So I've written some books, and I own 3,000 books here for National Book Month. I feel like that's pretty relevant. But it was with that journey in history that I got started. That I got really interested in learning more and learning what is contained in books. But what's really fascinating is that it's not just the information that's in the books that helped me, for example, become the professional that I am, both at the park sites, but now doing what I do, you know, going around on TV, doing presentations and you know, having the authorships. But it's also the history of the book itself, because when you hold the book in your hand, there is actually a lot of knowledge that is going into the craft itself. Think about the components that are in it. You have binding, you have paper, and you have pigment. So the binding, for example, in the past would be things like calfskin or pigskin or some form of leather. Sometimes we would have jewelry in it, believe it or not, or gold in there, or even pearl on the binding itself. The paper, which is another component. Now, we think of it as coming from wood, right? Wood pulp. Believe it or not, historically, wood pulp came from, was actually kind of, if you will, inspired by wasps. Wasps who chew on wood pulp to create their nests were the inspiration about 200 years ago over the course. Now remember, books go back thousands of years, but so relatively speaking, that's recent in the history of books. 200 years ago, you have this development of using that wood pulp as paper, and that's really important in craftsmanship, because what happens is with the paper is people began to sew paper together as they had done before the wood and into the wood as well. So that's a craftsmanship. And today, if you look at your book very closely, you will see that sometimes the paper does have sewing in there in addition to the glue. That comes from there. And finally, the last component of a book, you have the binding, the paper, and the pigment. Pigment is the ink. You see ink on the book, of course. Well, back in the day, they might have things like mercury, even gold, believe it or not. They might have arsenic. They might even have cochineal beetle, which is kind of, actually will help lead to the color that you're wearing on you right now, or the color I have on my bow tie. It's red, pink, purple. You can kind of make a lot of colors out of it, seen as a very status-driven color. So how about you? You're in high status right now if you're back in the day. And so these are the ways that people will use the ink and pigment as a way to show status when books were much less common. In the days of Thomas Jefferson, for example, having a bookshelf would be considered having a library. And he himself, in his period, though, collected more than 6,000 books. So he doubled me up in an era when books were hard to come by. So it shows you what a book-crazy person he was. A bibliophile is what it's known as. But that's all the pieces of the stories that go into the books that are in your hands.
I think what also is so important, Raffi, when we talk about how books are constructed, you think about some of these books, they really do age back thousands of years. So kind of understanding how they're put together, how some hold up and some don't, is really interesting. And it's led us right to the paperback books.
That's right. That's right.
How did we get there?
Well, paperback books are an effort to make things cheaper, right? Now, let me say something really quick on going back thousands of years. One of the materials for paper that was often used was basically linen. Or you take flaxseed, you beat it down, you actually process it, and then you beat it down to rags, and that linen paper lasts a long time. It feels closer to maybe if you use cotton paper on a resume before, that is kind of what it feels like. And that linen paper lasts for centuries, even more than the wood pulp paper does. So when you say books go back, way back, that's part of the reason why. But as the wood pulp came out, it made things cheaper. And think about the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th and early 20th century. And in that process, when you get the paperback wax books coming up, making books cheaper with the wood, and as a result of making it cheaper, making it much more widespread where if you have a bookshelf, you're not going to call that a library today. Books are much more accessible, as you know, and go beyond paper nowadays, of course, electronically to access a book as well.
National Book Month, you heard it from Raffi himself. If you're looking for an expensive book, you now know how to. I think if there's a message for anyone this National Book Month, Raffi, Andonian, what do you want people to know about books? You know, just having that respect, understanding where they came from. Why should they study this month?
Two things. One, literacy, because by having the printing press in the book, as opposed to handwritten books, which is how books were written for centuries until the last few hundred years, it made it mass production more easily, so you're able to read and you're able to access information in part because of the printing press. So appreciate your access to information is what I would say today. And number two, appreciate the craft that goes behind the book besides the information and knowledge that it contains, because that is a piece of art that you're holding that represents centuries of trying different ways of trying to connect the knowledge of the past in a way that you can communicate directly to the author, mind to mind, without the centuries of time in between polluting that connection.
Wow, Raffi, I think from understanding the books to writing them yourself, you really do have a lot of background when it comes to so many things. And if you guys are interested in learning more about not only Raffi's books, but his tours, go ahead, visit celebrityhistorian.com. Check out Raffi's YouTube channel, celebrity_historian. He's also on Instagram, and for tours and more, visit RaffiRegulars.com. Stick with us here on Studio STL, guys. We'll have more coming up.